In this video, I'm going to teach you how to do Japanese short rows. So I've completed one here just to show you before we start. Here's the gap from turning my short row, and in a Japanese short row, you temporarily hang a stitch marker or a piece of waste yarn in your work, and we will use them when it comes time to close up those gaps. And now I'll show you how that's all done. This one's going to be a little bit longer if you've been watching my other short row videos, because there are two ways to do the Japanese short row. They're both exactly the same. It's just one uses stitch markers to mark your gap closing spot, and the other one uses a scrap yarn, and I'll show you both in this video, both continental style and English style. So work up to where you need to do your turn. And in this case, for the Traveling Knitter's Yarn Pouch pattern, which is what I'm producing this video for, is to support those lessons, you work up to the marker and slip the marker off and turn. Then with your yarn in front, you slip one stitch purlwise and place a marker on your working yarn, then continue on with the pattern. For this pattern, we are going to purl 2 and place the marker. Then continue to the end of the row. Now I will tell you that this is my least favorite way of doing short rows because I find it very fiddly. However, other folks love the Japanese short rows, so I encourage you to learn the different methods and decide on your own whether or not you like it. Don't take my word for it. All right, and I apologize if you hear my dogs barking in the background. We have a new puppy, and he's 9 months old now, but he's still very much puppy, and whew, he's a wild thing. All right, continuing on with the knitting. Going to knit up to the marker, and then I'll switch hands to show you how to do the Japanese short row in the English style of knitting. It just takes me a little bit longer to knit that way, and I hate to have you suffer through that when I'm just doing the knit stitches. So here we are where we need to do the short row. Going to drop the short row marker. So now I'm going to turn my work, and with the yarn in front, I'm going to slip one purlwise, like you normally slip a stitch, and then put a stitch marker on the working yarn. Then continue in pattern. In this case, for this pattern, we're going to purl 2 and then replace the marker. And it's a little bit fiddly with that stitch marker there, but just kind of try to ignore it and continue on with your pattern. So I've purled 2, I'm going to replace the marker and then work to the end of the row. Okay, we're going to do this all again the exact same way, but I'm going to show you how to mark the spots with a waste yarn instead of stitch markers, because particularly if you're doing a lot of short rows, like in the Traveling Knitter's Yarn Pouch pattern, I think there's 20 short rows in each section. It just gets a little cumbersome having all those stitch markers there. So I've worked up to my stitch marker. I'm going to drop it off and turn, and now we're going to slip one with the yarn in front, and instead of hanging a stitch marker on my working yarn, I am just going to hang a piece of waste yarn over it. So I've cut a long piece of waste yarn and I just dangle it there, and now I'm going to purl 2 and replace the marker I used to remind me where to do my short rows, and continue to the end of the row. another knit row, so I'm going to knit up to the marker. Oops, not that marker. That's the marker to remind me to do my garter stitch border. Okay, this is my short row marker, so I'm going to drop the marker and turn, and I'll switch to English style. Slip one with the yarn in front, then just take the yarn that you have connected in that first turn and bring it over and lay it over your working yarn just like that. So you can see how I have it caught in there. And then you purl two and replace the marker, but I'm at the end of my row, so I'm just going to finish the row, and then I'll show you how to close those gaps. Yes, you can see me struggle. This is why I knit continental style, because my right hand really does not know how to knit. My brain knows what it should do. The hand just does not want to follow. Here's what it looks like on the back side. It looks kind of a mess when you're doing Japanese short rows, because you have either a bunch of stitch markers hanging there, or you've got waste yarn hanging there in the back. This is the front, and you can see it does have the gaps just like normal, and all of your stitches look normal, but there's a gap between the stitches. So to close those gaps, we are going to knit up to the spot where you have either the waste yarn or your stitch marker hanging. So here we are at the gap where the waste yarn is. So you can see it's hanging there between those two stitches. You're going to pull either the waste yarn or the stitch marker up and put that strand on your left needle and knit it together with the next stitch. Now this might seem weird because the gap is right there, and you would think that you would knit across the gap, but you don't. Somehow it works out. Okay, here I am again where that waste yarn is hanging between the two stitches. I pull that up. Well, let me show you English style. Okay, probably still want to grab that with your left hand, that waste yarn, and pull it up and drop that strand onto the needle and knit those two strands together. And continue until the next spot where you have either the waste yarn or a stitch marker. Stitch markers are a little bit more obvious. There is that benefit of using the stitch marker. And lift up the strand and put it on your left needle, just like that. And you can take the stitch marker off or leave it on and take it off later, but you'll knit that strand together with the next stitch. And I'll switch back to continental to show you how it's done that way. So here we are, we've got the strand with the stitch marker on it. Going to lift the strand up and put it on the needle. Take the stitch marker off to get it out of the way, and knit that strand together with the next stitch. So it's like a knit two together. And here we are at the last one. So lift that stitch up. You can either use your left hand or your right hand, it doesn't matter. Just to open that stitch up, lift up on the stitch marker and insert your needle into that strand. Then knit it together with the next stitch. And then work to the end of the row. And when you're finished, your work will look like this. There's almost kind of like a tiny gap sometimes left right there, but I tell you, as you knit some more rows, that will absolutely disappear, and these short rows will look pretty much invisible.